The man whose voice I'd been hired to transcribe had been dead for 2 weeks. I didn't know that yet when I pressed play on the first tape. If I had, I think I'd have driven the whole box back to the lawyer's office and set it down on his desk and told him to find somebody else. Instead, I made a pot of coffee, put on my headphones, and let a dead man start telling me about the night my sister disappeared. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's the problem with knowing how a story ends. You want to skip to the part that matters. Let me start with the money, because the money is the reason I said yes to any of it. It was the 3rd week of November, and I was $400 short of rent. I transcribe audio for a living, depositions, podcasts, the occasional academic interview, anything with a voice and a deadline. It is not a career anyone dreams about. You sit in a dark apartment with good headphones, and you turn other people's words into text, 8 hours a day, and the work is steady right up until it isn't. That autumn it wasn't. 2 of my regular clients had switched to some automated service that cost 1/10 of what I did and got the names wrong half the time, and the work had dried up like a creek in August. So when the email came in, I read it twice. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of, Halle and Associates, and addressed down. The message was short. A client's estate required the transcription of a private audio collection, roughly 18 hours of recordings. The work was sensitive and confidential. Payment was $9,000, half up front, the other half on delivery. They had found my name through a transcription directory and wanted to know if I was available. $9,000. For 18 hours of audio, I'd normally charge maybe 2. I assumed it was a scam. That's what $9,000 means. When you're $400 short on rent, it means somebody's about to ask for your bank details and a small processing fee. I almost deleted it. I wrote back instead. I asked the obvious questions. What was the content? Why the rate? Why me? The reply came an hour later, and it was the rate that they explained, not the content. The recordings, Mr. Hawley wrote, were of a personal nature, and the family wanted them handled by a single individual rather than a service, with a signed confidentiality agreement. The premium reflected the discretion required. He did not say what was on them. He said a courier would deliver the materials and the contract that same afternoon if I agreed. I agreed. A courier came at 4. He was a kid in a company polo who didn't make eye contact, and he handed me a padded envelope and a cardboard box about the size of a microwave, sealed with packing tape. I signed his tablet. He left. I stood in my doorway holding $9,000 worth of someone else's secrets and feeling, for the first time in weeks, like I might make it to December. The envelope held the contract. I read it more carefully than I've read anything in my life, because $400 short makes you careful. It was ordinary enough. Standard confidentiality language. I was not to copy the recordings, not to discuss their contents, not to retain any portion after delivery. I was to transcribe them in order, tape 1 through tape 9, and deliver a clean document. There was one clause that I read 3 times before I understood it wasn't a typo. Tape 9 is not to be transcribed until expressly authorized in writing by the firm. The transcriber will hold tape 9 sealed and will not play it. Breach of this term voids all payment. I remember thinking it was strange, and then thinking about December and signing my name. People sign strange things for $9,000. I've thought a lot since about how cheap I came. The box held the tapes. They were cassettes, actual cassettes, the kind I hadn't held since I was a child. Plastic shells with the little oval windows and the spools of brown ribbon. 9 of them, each in its own case, each labeled in the same careful handwriting. Tape 1, tape 2, on down to tape 9, which had a strip of red tape across the case and the word sealed written over it, as if the contract weren't enough, as if someone had wanted to be sure. Underneath the cassettes, packed in the bottom of the box, was a cassette player. Not a fancy one. A gray plastic deck with a foam-padded headphone jack, the kind they used to sell for language students. A sticky note on the top, same handwriting, use this one. The tapes are old. I set them out on my desk in a row. 9 little graves. That's a morbid thing to say, and I didn't think it at the time. At the time I thought, easy money. I thought I can probably do 3 a day. I thought about nothing at all except the rent and the relief of it. I plugged in the player. I made the coffee. I put on my headphones, slid tape 1 out of its case, and pushed it into the deck, and the spools caught and turned, and after a few seconds of hiss, a man began to speak. His voice was older, calm. There was a quality to it I can only describe as tired, not sleepy, but tired the way a man is tired at the end of a long job he never wanted. He spoke slowly, the way people do when they're choosing each word, or when they know no one is going to interrupt them. My name doesn't matter, he said. You'll be told it was Albert Reyes, and that's fine. That name will do. What matters is that I'm telling the truth now, finally, and that you're going to write it all down, word for word, because that's the only way anyone will believe it. People believe things that are written down. I've learned that. A man can say a thing out loud his whole life and it changes nothing. Put it on a page and suddenly it's evidence. I started typing. That's the job. You don't listen to the words exactly. You let them pass through your fingers. It's almost meditative. I had typed half a page before the meaning of what he was saying caught up with me, and I slowed down, and then I stopped. I'm going to tell you about a town, he said. A small one north of here, the kind of place that has one good road in and one bad road out. There's a river on the east side that floods every spring, and a mill that closed before any of you were born, and a long, flat stretch of nothing called Cold Water Road, where the kids used to go at night because there was nowhere else to go. The coffee was going cold in my hand. I set it down very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have started to shake and you don't want anyone to see, because I knew that road. I grew up on the bad road out of a town north of here. I had stood on Cold Water Road at night when I was 16 because there was nowhere else to go. I knew the river that flooded and the mill that closed, and I had spent 15 years and a great deal of money making sure I never had to think about any of it again. The town's called Ashford, the dead man said, gently, like he was sorry to be the one to tell me. And I want to talk about something that happened there. Something they never got right. A girl, the tape hissed on. My hands had stopped shaking and gone completely still over the keys. It was the summer the river ran low, he said, and there was a girl who walked down Cold Water Road one night and didn't walk back. He let that sit. The spools turned. Outside my window, the city went on being loud and bright and indifferent. And in my headphones, a man who'd been dead for 2 weeks took a slow breath and got ready to tell me the rest. I didn't write it down. I sat there with my fingers on the keys and the cursor blinking, and I waited to hear whether a stranger in a box was about to say my sister's name. He didn't say her name. Not yet. That came later, and when it came, it was worse for the waiting. What he did was describe her. She was 17 that summer, the dead man said. Tall for her age. Dark hair she wore long, because her mother kept telling her to cut it. She worked at the diner on the county road, the one with the broken sign, and she'd walk home along Coldwater because it was shorter, even though everyone told her not to. She wasn't afraid of the dark. That was the thing about her. The whole town had decided to be afraid of that road, and she just wasn't. I had stopped typing somewhere around 17. My hands were in my lap. The cursor blinked on the half-finished line, and I watched it and listened to a stranger describe my sister as if he had known her, as if he had any right. Maya, 17 that summer. Hair she wouldn't cut. The diner with the broken sign. She used to come home smelling like fryer grease and cigarette smoke from the regulars, and our mother would make her shower before bed, and Maya would laugh and say the smell was job security. I want to tell you about Maya properly, because the dead man only had the outline of her, and I had the whole thing. She was a year older than me, and she was the brave one, which in our family meant she was the one who got hit when our father was drinking, and the one who climbed out the window first to prove it was safe. She had a way of making the worst nights survivable. She'd narrate them like a wildlife documentary, and here we observe the male in his natural habitat, defending his territory of one recliner and a case of Pabst, until I was laughing so hard I forgot to be scared. I was 12 when I learned that you could laugh and be terrified at the same time, and Maya taught me, and I have never entirely unlearned it. She vanished the summer I was 16. The official version, the one that town settled on because it was the comfortable one, was that Maya ran away. She was 17. She had a hard home. She'd talked about leaving. She walked home from the diner one night in July and never arrived. And her purse was gone, and her little money was gone. And so the sheriff wrote it down as a runaway, and most of Ashford agreed to believe it, because the alternative was that something had happened to a girl on a road. They all used, and nobody had seen a thing. My mother never believed it. She knew Maya would not have left without me. I knew it, too. But knowing a thing and proving it are different countries, and we didn't have the map. We searched. God, we searched. There were volunteers, lines of people walking the floodplain with sticks, and a man with a good loud voice organizing all of it, telling my mother to have faith. There were flyers on every pole in 3 counties. There was a candlelight thing at the church. And then there was a second summer, and the flyers faded, and the volunteers went back to their lives, and the man with the good loud voice put his hand on my mother's shoulder and said, "Sometimes we just don't get to know." And my mother nodded because she was too tired to do anything else. She died 9 years later. The doctors called it cancer. I called it the other thing. She had a sister, the dead man said. I came back to the room all at once, the way you surface from deep water. Younger. I used to see them sometimes, the 2 of them walking. I think about that sister. He paused. The tape hissed. I think about her more than I should lately. I wonder what she grew up into. I wonder if she ever got out of that town or if it kept her the way it keeps people. I had gotten out and built a small gray life, $400 from collapse, and a dead man in a box had just reached across 15 years and put his finger directly on the center of me. I stopped the tape. I sat in the dark for a long time. Then I did the only thing my whole life had trained me to do, which was to put my headphones back on and keep listening, because there was something he knew, and I needed it more than I needed to be safe. Before I played the second tape, I did what I should have done in the first hour. I looked him up. There was an Albert Rees who had died 2 weeks earlier, a death notice, 3 lines, no photograph, no survivors listed, services private. It gave an age, 71, and a town 200 miles south of Ashford, and nothing else. No obituary written by a loving family. Just the bare municipal fact of a man stopping. I searched the name with Ashford and got nothing. I searched it with the mill and got nothing. I searched my sister's name, which I do maybe twice a year when I'm weak, and got the same handful of results I always got. A 15-year-old news item, a cold case forum where strangers speculated about girls they'd never met, a database entry that listed her as missing and gave a case number and a phone line that no longer rang. Maya Vance, missing since July, last seen on Coldwater Road. I put the second tape in. He talked for a while about the town again, the texture of it, the way everyone knew everyone, and that was both the safety and the trap. He talked about the mill, where he said he'd worked nights as the watchman after it, closed, not to guard anything. There was nothing left to guard, but because the bank that owned the carcass needed a name on a payroll for the insurance, and he was a name that came cheap and didn't ask questions. He talked about how a night watchman at a dead mill sees everything and is seen by no one. How he became, over the years, a kind of furniture of that road. I saw a lot from the mill, he said. Headlights, kids parking, men who shouldn't have been where they were, with people who weren't their wives. I learned that a town is 2 towns, the one it tells itself about, and the one that drives down Coldwater Road at 2 in the morning with the lights off. Then his voice changed. It dropped, the way a voice drops when a man is about to set something down that he's carried a long way. I saw what happened to the girl, he said. I saw it, and I said nothing for 15 years, and that silence has eaten everything in me that was worth keeping. I'm telling it now because I'm dying, and because there's a particular person who deserves to know, and I have arranged for her to be the one who writes this down. Her name was Maya Vance, and I know exactly what happened to her, because I watched it happen, and I did nothing. I tore the headphones off. I don't fully remember the next few minutes. I know I stood up. I know I walked to the window and back. I know that somewhere in there I understood the shape of the thing I'd signed, that I had not been chosen because I was a good transcriber at a good price. I had been chosen because I was Maya's sister. The whole arrangement, the courier, the $9,000, the careful handwriting, all of it had been built to put these tapes in front of me specifically, and a dying man had reached out of the ground to make sure it happened. He had said a particular person who deserves to know. He had meant me. I picked up my phone and called the number at the bottom of the contract. the one for Holly and Associates, and it rang 4 times and went to a recording that gave the firm's name in a flat, automated voice and then a long beep. I didn't leave a message. What would I have said? I sat back down at the desk with the 9 little graves in their row and the 2 open ones in the deck's memory, and I understood that I was not going to be able to stop, that whatever this was, I had been falling toward it for 15 years, and the falling was nearly over. Holly and Associates occupied half, a floor of a building, downtown that had been nicer in some previous decade. I went in person the next morning because the phone wasn't going to give me anything, and because I had learned long ago that it's harder for a person to lie to your face than to your voicemail. The receptionist told me Mr. Holly was with a client. I told her I'd wait. I waited 2 hours, and then a door opened and a tired man in a good suit came out. And when she said my name, his face did something complicated recognition, and under it, something I can only call dread. He took me into his office and closed the door. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. "The whole point of the arrangement was that you'd never need to be here. Your client is my sister's." I stopped. I didn't have a word for what Albert Reyes was to Maya. He says he watched a girl die. That girl was my sister. You knew that. You hired me because of that. Holly sat down heavily. He looked at the tapes I'd brought. I'd brought them, all 9, because I hadn't been willing to leave them in the apartment, and he looked at the red strip across the 9th. "I knew his instructions," he said carefully. "I didn't know the contents." He was very clear about that. I was to find the transcriber by name, deliver the materials, hold the funds, and enforce one term above all others. He nodded at the sealed tape. "You don't play that one. Not until I authorize it." He was emphatic. He said it more than once, and Albert Reyes was not a man who repeated himself for fun. Who was he? A client. He came to me 8 months ago. He was already sick then. He paid in advance, in cash, for the handling of his estate, which consisted entirely of those 9 tapes and a sum of money set aside for the transcription. He had no family that I could find. He had your sister's case file printed and tabbed, and he had your name and your professional details, which he had clearly spent some effort acquiring. Holly rubbed his eyes. He died 2 weeks ago. The day he died, I was instructed to send the email. You answered it within the hour, the day he died. I had answered a dead man's email within the hour. He had timed the whole thing to land the moment he was gone, so that there'd be no one to ask, no one to confront, nothing but the tapes and me, and the truth. He'd been too cowardly to tell while it could have cost him anything. "Why the sealed one?" I asked. "Why can I hear 8 men confess and not the 9th? "I don't know what's on it," Holly said, and I believed him, because he looked like a man who had been losing sleep over not knowing. He said only that the 9th tape was not his to give until the right moment, and that I would know the moment when it came, and that if I let you hear it too early, it would put you in danger before you were ready to be in it. He swallowed. Those were his words. Before she's ready to be in it. I left with the tapes. At the door, Holly said my name, and when I turned, he was standing very straight, the way men stand when they've decided to say one true thing. "Whatever's on those," he said. He died to make sure you heard it. Men don't spend their last 8 months building a machine like this for a small reason. Be careful. And don't play the ninth one until I tell you. Please." I said I wouldn't. I meant it at the time. I hadn't been back to Ashford in 11 years. I'd promised myself I never would. The drive up is 3 hours of interstate, and then 40 minutes of the kind of road that narrows and roughens until you can feel the town's gravity pulling the car in. The one good road in. I came over the last rise, and there it was, in the valley smaller than memory. The river a brown thread on the east side, and the mill standing over everything, like a tooth that should have been pulled years ago. I told myself I was there to listen to the rest of the tapes, somewhere closer to their source. That was a lie I was telling well enough to half believe. The truth was that the dead man's voice had pulled a thread, and the thread led here, and I was done pretending I could live a life with that thread hanging loose. I took a room at a motel on the county road, the only one, 6 units, and a flickering vacancy sign. I paid cash. I parked the car around the back where it couldn't be seen from the road, and I didn't think too hard about why I'd done that. In the afternoon, I drove past the house. I hadn't planned to. The car just went, the way it had earlier known the way to Hale's office. It was someone else's house now. There was a tricycle in the yard and a different color on the door, and I sat across the street with the engine running and looked at the window that had been Maya's, and I didn't cry, which surprised me. I think you can only cry over a thing while you still half expect it to be untrue. I'd had 15 years. I drove out to Coldwater Road as the light was going. It was exactly the same. That was the unbearable part. The flat stretch, the floodplain falling away on the right, the mill rising on the left with its black windows. The pavement where a girl had walked home from the diner one July night and not arrived. I got out and stood on the shoulder in the cooling air, and I felt closer to Maya than I had in 11 years, and also I felt watched. The small, hot feeling on the back of the neck that the body produces before the mind has any evidence. I told myself it was nerves and drove back to the motel in the dark. The door to my room was locked exactly as I'd left it. Nothing was broken, nothing forced. But I knew the moment I stepped inside that someone had been there, because I am a person who lives alone and notices the position of her own things, and the box of tapes I had left on the dresser was no longer square to the wall. It had been turned slightly, the way you turn a thing to read a label, and then set down without care. I counted them with my hands shaking. 9, all 9 still there, including the sealed one. Whoever had come hadn't taken them. They'd only wanted to know they were real. Ruth Marsh had been the detective on my sister's case, and she was the only person in Ashford who had ever looked my mother in the eye and said out loud that she didn't think Maya ran away. She was retired now, living in a small, tidy house on the north end with a garden she clearly loved more than she'd ever loved the job. She knew me before I finished saying my name. She said I had Maya's walk. Then she made coffee, and we sat in her kitchen, and I told her almost everything, the tapes, the dead man, the watcher, the turned box. I didn't tell her about the sealed ninth. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I'd already started in some back room of myself planning to break the promise, and I didn't want a witness to the planning. She listened without interrupting, the way good detectives and good doctors do. "I want to tell you something I never told your mother," she said when I was done, because I couldn't prove it, and it would only have hurt her. I never believed the runaway story. Maya had no history of running. She had a sister she'd have walked through fire for. She looked at me. She had you. Girls like that don't leave a little sister behind in a house like yours. I knew it then, and I know it now. You had a suspect. Marsh got up and refilled cups that didn't need refilling, which is what people do when they're deciding how much to say. I had a feeling, she said. Not a suspect, because a suspect is something you're allowed to write down. And every time I tried to write this one down, I got told to unwrite it. There was a man in this town who put himself at the center of that search, organized the volunteers, ran the phone tree, stood next to your mother at the candlelight vigil with his hand on her shoulder. Everybody loved him for it. And every instinct I had, every year I'd spent learning to read people, told me that man was managing something, not grieving it. He was always one step ahead of the investigation. He always knew what we were going to do before we did it. And when I started, very quietly, to wonder about him on paper, I was taken off anything to do with the case and reassigned to writing parking ordinances until I took the hint and retired. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a sprinkler ticked across her garden. "What's his name?" I asked, though some part of me had already heard the dead man say it on a tape I hadn't reached yet. "Raymond Keller," she said. And the name landed in me like a stone into a well I'd thought was dry, because I knew it, I had always known it. Raymond Keller was the man with the good loud voice, the man who had organized a search for my sister, the man who had put his hand on my mother's shoulder and told her to have faith, and later told her that sometimes we just don't get to know. He's still here. I asked. "He's a councilman now," Marsh said. "Volunteer Fire Chief Emeritus. They named the new footbridge after his late wife. Raymond Keller is the most beloved man in Ashford." She held my eyes. "And I have spent 20 years certain that he killed your sister, and not one day of those 20 years able to do a single thing about it." I went back to the motel and played tapes 5 and 6 with Marsh's name still ringing, and the dead man told me the night. "I want to be exact," Albert Reyes said, "because exact is the only thing I have left to give. It was the 14th of July. I know because the mill paid me on the 1st and the 15th, and I remember thinking I'd be paid the next day. It was past midnight. Warm. The river was low that summer. You could walk the floodplain dry, which matters. You'll see why it matters. I was up in the office on the 2nd floor of the mill, where I kept my chair and my radio, and I saw headlights come slow up Coldwater from the diner end. And I saw, in the headlights, a girl walking. The Vance girl. I knew her by then the way you know the people who use a road. She was walking home, the way she always did, not afraid. The truck slowed when it reached her. I thought at first that it was someone offering her a ride. That happened, and I saw her stop, and I saw her lean toward the window the way you do when you know the driver. When it's not a stranger, but somebody from town, somebody you'd trust. And then it happened very fast, and I have spent 15 years slowing it down. There was a movement. The girl went down. I have told myself 100 stories about whether the truck struck her or whether the man struck her, and the truth is, I was 100 yards off in the dark, and I don't know, and it doesn't matter, because what I know for certain is what came after. The man got out. He stood over her in his own headlights for a long time, not helping her, just standing. And then he picked her up. She didn't help him. She was a weight in his arms. You understand what I'm telling you. And he carried her down into the floodplain that was dry that summer. And he was gone among the cottonwoods for the better part of an hour. And when he came back, he was alone, and he was carrying a shovel. The tape hissed. I was not breathing. I knew the truck, Albert said. I knew the man. Everyone in Ashford knew that man, and that was exactly why I said nothing. Because I was a watchman at a dead mill with a record from another state, and no one's good opinion, and he was the man the whole town leaned on. If I'd walked into the sheriff's office and said what I saw, they'd have asked which of us they were going to believe, and we both already knew the answer. So I held my tongue. And the next week he organized the search, and I watched a man who had carried a girl into the floodplain with a shovel stand up in the church and ask the town to pray. And I understood that there is no bottom to what a person can do, no bottom at all, and that I was now a part of it, because silence is a kind of carrying too. His name is Raymond Keller. The girl is buried where the floodplain meets the old mill race, under the third cottonwood from the water, where the ground floods every spring and settles, every fall, and no dog and no machine ever thought to look, because why would you search a place the river owns? That's where she is. That's where your sister is. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have said it that night, and I have been dying of not saying it ever since. I sat in the dark motel room and I did not cry. I had been right about the crying. I picked up my phone, and my hands were steady now. Steadier than they'd been in days, because grief that finally has a shape is almost a relief. I met Raymond Keller the next day. I hadn't planned to. He found me. I was at the diner, the same one, the broken sign, finally replaced by a worse one, drinking coffee. I couldn't taste and trying to decide what a person does with the knowledge of where her murdered sister is buried, when a man slid into the booth across from me like we were old friends. He was past 70 now, broad and gone soft, with white hair combed back and a warm, crinkled, trustworthy face. He had a voice you wanted to believe. I understood, sitting across from him, how a whole town had handed him their grief to manage. He radiated competence and comfort. He was the man you'd want running the search for your daughter. That was the horror of him, fully assembled in one booth. He was perfect for it. You're the Vance girl, he said. Nora, my God, you have her face. He shook his head slowly, sorrowfully. I think about your family every day. I want you to know that every single day, I have never in my life worked as hard at anything as I worked at keeping my face still. People said you were back in town, he went on, asking around, talking to Ruth Marsh. He said her name kindly, the way you'd name a relative who'd gotten confused in old age. Ruth's a good woman. She took your sister's case very hard. Took it personally, maybe more than was healthy. She had some ideas toward the end that weren't, well, grief does things to people. It makes us need an answer so badly we'll build one out of nothing. He reached across the table and patted my hand, once his palm dry and warm and heavy. I'd hate to see you do that to yourself. You got out of this town. That was the right thing. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for the people we lost is let them rest. Let them rest. The man who had carried my sister into the floodplain with a shovel was sitting across from me, telling me to let her rest. "Thank you," I said. I don't know how I said it. "That means a lot, coming from you." He smiled, satisfied, and patted my hand again, and got up, and told me to drive safe on my way out of town. And there was nothing in the words you could point to, nothing you could write down, but I heard it exactly as he meant it. On my way out of town, soon, now. I watched through the window as he crossed the lot to his truck. It was newer than the one Albert had described, of course 15 years newer, but it was the same kind of truck, parked the same careful way, and I sat very still as he pulled out, because a second truck had pulled out behind his, a dark one that had been sitting at the edge of the lot the whole time I'd been inside, and it followed him only as far as the road, and then it slowed, and it sat, idling facing the diner. Facing me. I had felt watched on Coldwater Road. I had found my tapes turned in a locked room. And now I understood that the man with the good loud voice had not come to that booth to comfort me. He had come to see my face, and measure me, and tell me, kindly, that I should be gone by dark. I didn't leave by dark. I want to be honest that this was not entirely courage. Part of it was that I'd spent 15 years being made small by that town, and the thought of being chased out of it, again by Raymond Keller's warm, dry hand, was more than I could stomach. But part of it was simple arithmetic. I had a dead man's testimony naming Keller. I had Marsh, who'd believed it for 20 years. I had a location, a specific one, the third cottonwood from the water, and I had one tape I hadn't played. I called Hale's office from the motel parking lot. It rang and went to the flat automated voice. I tried his cell, the number he'd written by hand on the back of his card. It was disconnected. I tried the firm again, and this time a recording told me the number was no longer in service, which it had not said the day before. A lawyer's office does not go out of service overnight. I went back into the room, and I sat on the edge of the bed with the 9 tapes in their row, and I made myself think clearly. Keller knew I was here. Keller knew about the tapes. The turned box had been his message, or his man's. We know, and we can reach them. And you? Halle, who knew the whole architecture of this thing, had gone silent in a way that lawyers don't. The dark truck had followed me back. I'd seen it twice more on the drive, hanging 4 cars back, patient. I understood in exactly the danger Albert Reyes had predicted. Before she's ready to be in it. I had reached the end of the road he'd built for me, and the only thing left at the end of it was the tape. I'd promised 2 different men I wouldn't play. I picked up the 9th tape, the red strip, sealed in the careful hand. The contract said breach voids all payment. $9,000. The number that had started all of this, that had made me sign a strange thing in a dark apartment $400 short of rent. I thought about chapter 1 of my own life, about how cheap I'd come. I thought, I am not that person anymore. That person was 4 weeks and 15 years ago. I thought about Hale's voice. He died to make sure you heard it. And Albert's. The 9th tape is not mine to give until the right moment, and you'll know the moment when it comes. Outside on the county road, an engine slowed and idled, and did not pass. I knew the moment when it came. I peeled the red strip off the case. My hands were steady. I slid the 9th tape into the deck, and the spools caught and turned. For a few seconds there was only hiss. Then a voice, and it wasn't Albert's. It was younger and rougher, and it took me a moment to place why it raised every hair on my body before I'd understood a word. And then I understood. I had heard this voice the day before, across a diner booth, telling me to let my sister rest. 15 years younger, but the same. The same warmth turned now to something else. It was Raymond Keller, and it was a recording of him talking to Albert Reyes. "Told you to leave it alone, Albert." Keller's voice low, close to the microphone, the sound of a man who didn't know he was being recorded. "You come up here, you knock on my door at night. You say you've got a conscience. Now, after 15 years on my money, you spend it the same as I did, every dollar. So don't you sit in my kitchen and tell me about a conscience." And then Albert, on the tape, older even then, frightened. "I just want to know she had a Christian, that you put her somewhere. She's where the river takes care of her," Keller said. "And that's the last time you and I will ever say one word about it. You understand me? I have given you a quiet life, Albert. I can take it back. You're a man with a record and no people. You'd be the easiest thing in the world to make disappear, and there's not a soul in this town who'd ask a second question. Now finish your drink and go home and be grateful, the way you've been grateful for 15 years. The tape ran on. There was the sound of a glass set down, a chair, a door, and then Albert's voice, alone, close, recording the last of it for whoever would someday listen. "I had a little machine in my coat pocket," he said softly. "I'd carried it for a year, hoping I'd never use it, hoping I'd find the courage to do this the right way, in daylight in front of the law. I never found that courage, but I found this. It's his voice. It's him saying it. I couldn't give my own word against him. Who'd take a watchman's word? But maybe I could give you his. This is for the sister, for Nora. If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone and the lawyer judged it time. Or it means you couldn't wait, and either way I don't blame you. Everything I told you is true. The third cottonwood from the water. And now you have his voice admitting it, which is the one thing in this world he was never afraid of, because he never imagined the watchman was a man at all. Take it to someone who can't be bought. Don't trust the sheriff here. Don't trust the council. Find one honest person and put this in their hands, and don't let go. I'm sorry it took a dead man to do what a living one should have. I'm sorry. Take care of yourself, Nora. You were the thing she was always walking home to." The tape ran out and the spools stopped, and the room was completely silent. I was holding the most dangerous object in the state, a recording, and his own voice, of Raymond Keller confessing to murder and to 15 years of buying, a witness's silence. And out on the county road, the idling engine shut off. A door opened. A door closed. And gravel began to crunch, slow and unhurried, coming across the lot toward my room. I did 3 things in the time it took the footsteps to cross the lot, and I did them faster than I'd known I could think. I popped the 9th tape out of the deck and put it down the front of my shirt, against my ribs, because some animal part of me knew that whatever happened next, that tape could not be in a drawer for someone to find. I took out my phone, and I called Ruth Marsh, and when she answered I said only, "Keller's at my motel, and I have his confession on tape," and I left the line open and slid the phone under the bed with the call still running. and I picked up the lamp off the knit stand, the heavy ceramic base of it, and I stood against the wall by the door. The footsteps stopped outside. There was a long pause, then a soft knock, almost polite. "Nora." Keller's voice warm again, the diner voice. "Nora, it's Ray Keller. I saw your light. Open the door, let's talk." "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I didn't open the door," I said. "Through it? I know where the third cottonwood is." The silence on the other side changed temperature. When he spoke again, the warmth was still there, but it was painted over something flat and cold, and I understood I was hearing the real voice for the first time, the one Albert had heard in his kitchen. "That dead man," Keller said slowly. "Rays, he sent you something, didn't he?" I wondered. A low sound that might have been a laugh. "You're a smart girl, so be smart. Whatever he gave you, it's the word of a dead convict against a man this town would lay down in the road for. It's nothing, but it's nothing that can cost you everything, because I am out of road, Nora, and I am not spending what's left of me in a cell over a girl who's been gone 15 years. Open the door." "It's not his word," I said. "It's yours." The door came in. He was big and he was old, and he was fast with the kind of speed that fear and fury lend a body. And he came through that cheap motel door like it was paper, and I swung the lamp and caught him across the shoulder, and we went down together in the dark of that little room. I will not pretend I fought well. I fought like the 16-year-old who used to climb out the window first, desperately, without skill, with everything. His hand found my throat. His weight came down. I heard him saying something, low and almost gentle, the way you'd shush a child, and I understood with a terrible clarity that this was how it had been for Maya, that the last thing my sister had known was this man being gentle while he killed her. And I got a knee up, and I screamed, and I would not stop screaming. And then there were headlights flooding the room through the broken door, and a voice I knew, Marcia's voice. 20 years of held-back certainty finally let loose, shouting his name, and the weight came off me, and I was on the floor breathing in great whooping pulls of air, and Ruth Marsh was standing in the doorway with a service weapon she was no longer technically allowed to carry leveled at the most beloved man in Ashford, telling him to get on the ground, telling him she had been waiting 20 years to say exactly that. The tape was still against my ribs. I felt it there, the hard corner of it, while the room filled with light and other engines and other voices, and I kept one hand pressed over it the whole time, and I did not let go. They found her under the third cottonwood from the water. It took the state police 9 days, because the floodplain had flooded and settled 15 times and the ground guarded her the way Albert said it would. But he'd been exact to the end, and they dug where the dead man's voice told them to dig, and they brought my sister home. There was enough to know it was her. There was enough with the tape, with Marsh, with the records of 15 years of cash that a man named Albert Rays had received from a man named Raymond Keller to charge him. Keller never stood trial. His heart, which had carried him comfortably through 15 years of being the man the town leaned on, gave out in a cell 3 months later, which I have decided not to think of as justice and not to think of as escape, but simply as the river finally taking care of him too. The town did not, in the main, thank me. Towns don't, when you make them look at the second town, the one that drives down Coldwater Road with its lights off, most of Ashford would have preferred to keep loving Raymond Keller. But Ruth Marsh came to the small graveside service we held for Maya, a real one, finally 15 years late. And so did a handful of others, the ones who'd never quite believed, and that was enough. We buried her next to our mother. I think they'd both been walking toward that for a long time. I never collected the $9,000. Breaking the seal voided it the way the contract said, and I have never once been sorry. I'd come cheap, and chapter 1 of all this, I'd like to think I learned the price of things. I thought that was the end. It wasn't, quite. 6 weeks after the service, a package came to my apartment, forwarded from Hale's firm, which had quietly dissolved after Holly himself surfaced alive, ashamed, having run scared the moment Keller's people came asking, but alive. Inside was a single cassette. No red strip, no label in the careful hand, just a sticky note, and Hale's writing this time. Found this in the client's effects. It was not part of the estate. I think it was always meant to be yours. I had a feeling before I played it. I made coffee. I put on the headphones one more time. I pressed play. There was hiss. And then there was a girl's voice, 17 years old, laughing at something just out of frame, saying, "Is it on? Is it recording?" And it was Maya. It was my sister, alive that summer on some night before the last one, the tape thin and warped with age, but unmistakably her, the voice that had narrated our worst nights like a wildlife documentary until I could laugh and be terrified at the same time. Albert had been the mill watchman. He'd recorded everything. Headlights, kids packing, the 2 towns. And one warm night before the 14th of July he had recorded, without meaning to and without ever knowing what he had, 2 girls walking home along Coldwater Road, the older one teasing the younger one laughing, the sound of our feet on the pavement, the sound of Maya saying my name. "Nora," she says on the tape. "Nora, come on, walk faster, it's late." And then the recording ends, the way they all end, mid-step, mid-laugh, the spools running out into silence. I have it still. I don't play it often, but I know it's there, the way you know a light is on in a house down the road. And on the nights that are hard, and there are still hard nights, the dead don't fix you. They only stop being lost. I take it out and I press play, and I let my sister, 17 forever, tell me to walk faster, it's late. And I do. I walk faster. I'm still walking home to her. I always was.